very teary eyes today for some reason.
Yeah.
A lot of moon, a lot of water.
Welcome, everybody. This is the OPA webinar, Astrology for Corona Times. And so how is everybody doing today? We here at OPA are really happy to be offering you the wisdom of 4 truly amazing astrologers. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to log on. While we're waiting, I want to say that I'm honored to be the new president of OPA for the term 2020 to 2022. And we just completed a pretty great conference online. Our Zion conference was very successful. We were really happy that we were able to migrate to the platform to keep something going. And one of the aspects of the conference that was delayed was the peer groups and also the consulting skills training. Some of you might know that the astronomy training with Gemini Brett was taken to online format and happened a couple of weeks ago. But we've just scheduled peer groups for August and consulting skills for November via webinar. So for some of you who, maybe it's been challenging to come to these conference retreats, the distance in traveling. And of course, none of us can truly travel much these days. We have, now for the first time ever, we're going to offer those 2 core pieces of our certification via webinar. So look to your career astrologer to see some information about that. And of course, it'll be up on the website in the next couple of days, and we'll have it open for registration. What other announcements do I have? Well, we just had a solar eclipse in Cancer. We've also just moving into a new season. So it's a lot of exciting energy that's happening at this time. I also want to make everybody aware that each one of these speakers has written an article on their topic for today, and that article is published in the Career Astrologer that just came out. So in terms of getting more details and looking at their, maybe some aspects of their talk that might not be said verbally, there's an article for you. And we will also have recordings of today's webinar available for you in the next day. Now, if you have questions during this webinar, if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A. You can click on that and type your questions. And in some cases, if it's needed, I might interrupt the speaker and ask the question, but most of the questions we will work with at the very end after everybody has talked. Okay, we still have a few people arriving, but in a moment, we will begin. Lee, do you want to go ahead and upload the first page of your screen share?
Sure.
Mute myself.
And everybody else on the panel muted.
And I should not be muted.
And you should not be muted, and there you are.
Okay.
So Lee, is really known for practical application, a persistent hallmark, which has defined her, Lee Lehman. She has a PhD in botany from Rutgers University. She is the author of 11 books and a translation from the French. She's a tutor for the School of Traditional Astrology, both in horary and in a medical course which she has designed. Her online courses, Classical Studies, natal, electional, gaming, mundane, and weather prediction, bring classical astrology to the forefront as an astrological system. Lee was the recipient of the 1995 Mark Edmund Jones Award and the recipient of the 2008 Regulus Award for Education. So her topic today, Practical Medical Astrology for Pandemics. She will cover the fact that medical astrology is a complex subject, but there are two approaches to its use in a pandemic, horary and natal. We will examine how to answer the dreaded "do I have COVID" question. Then we will turn to the natal chart to examine the natal's ability to fend off disease in general during a particular time period. We can also review some herbal approaches to immunity, a discussion about the ethics of medical prediction, and then finally, approaches to forecasting epidemics as a medical process. Welcome, Lee. We're really delighted to have you here.
Well, thank you. This has been a rather incredible year for all of us. And normally when I talk about medical astrology, I don't include the teachings on pandemics. But here we are. Andre Barbeau, probably longer ago than the rest of us can even imagine, predicted that around 2021, based on the cyclic index, there was likely to be a pandemic. He was certainly right. There are a number of other reasons to take this up on a mundane medical level, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But basically, one of the difficulties of doing medical astrology, and I'm sure many of you who have been impacted and want to do this have noticed this, is that medical astrology encompasses a lot of different techniques from other fields of astrology. The natal chart can show certain tendencies. We often talk about this in terms of the temperament, but there are also changes in the body, the organs of the body, and the impact of challenges that can affect both body and soul, although in medical we mostly talk about the body, but we don't ever forget the soul. Horary techniques answer specific questions, and here we have the dreaded "do I have COVID" question now. Electional is used to pick times for procedures because sadly, other kinds of medical processes have not stopped and people still get other diseases, have to have treatments and so forth. Mundane is the overlap field with the examination of epidemics, but some of the earliest writings we have on the topic of epidemics were actually from Hippocrates and were medical in nature. So, okay, let's go in the correct direction. It's only Mercury retrograde. Nah, can't tell. Okay, the houses in medical astrology, just to review this, because I know a lot of you probably don't do very much with this in your practice. Vitality is given in the first house, illness in the sixth. And this is one of the big things to remember, those two, because oftentimes when people are new to medical, they reverse these, or they think they're going to see everything in the sixth. The medical advisor, which I'm using because many people do not necessarily use licensed physicians, but an acupuncturist is in the seventh as much as a doctor. We do have to have a house for death. I know many of you don't normally work with this much in your practice, but in medical you must, because death is always a possible outcome. And the method of treatment is given in the 10th. The old word for this was physic. So this can apply in varying degrees, both in natal and in horary. Now, we can also look at what we could call the measure of vitality in a chart. This is the sun and the moon, always involved with a person's vitality as well as the ascendant. When we talk about the high legicals, which is an old term that use and amaze your friends, the high legicals are generally the sun, moon, ascendant part of fortune, because in the old system of calculating life expectancy, those were the four most likely high legs or givers of life. You also give something to the planets in the first house, but these are basically the ways that you can measure vitality. On the other hand, we have ways of measuring what were called morbidity and mortality. Morbidity was illness, and mortality, of course, was death. Anything associated with the sixth house can refer to morbidity. In fact, the ruler of the sixth is considered, when you're doing medical, to be what we would call an accidental malefic, because we generally consider anything going on with the sixth or the eighth to be malefic in nature, because we always cheer for life. So planets in the sixth house cusp itself, as well as the ruler. Mortality, same kind of logic, but applied to the eighth. The eighth house cusp itself can tell us something. The eighth house ruler and planets in the eighth house as well. Now, just for an example, I've given you Boris Johnson because, as I'm sure pretty much everybody knows, he developed COVID some time ago. Fortunately, he survived it. But we can see sort of some of the influences whereby we can get to a reading about how you would look at a situation like this. In this diagram, Boris's chart is on the lower left, and his solar return, which is what I normally work with, is on the right. Being a classicist, I work with the solar return for the birthplace. So when you the first thing you should always do when you're doing medical work is examine the chart for vitality, not for illness, because we want to see what the person's resources are. So if we look at, if you recall that list that I just put up, we're going to start through with the high logicals. The sun in Gemini is not an especially strong place classically. Now here we're talking about mainly essential dignity and accidental fortitude. So the sun has no intrinsic dignity in the sign of Gemini, and it's in the ninth house, which is a cadent house. So that's not an especially strong placement for the sun, which means the sun is not going to be the world's best carrier of vitality. His moon is in Scorpio, the sign of its fall, so immediately there, that's a bit more of a problem. It's an uncomfortable moon, as we can say. However, it is angular. So in that sense, it's a bit stronger, but this is not a huge reading. The part of fortune is in, a classist would say, in the fifth house, because you slosh over 5 degrees into the next house using diurnal motion. So this is considered to be actually sextedent in nature. It's ruled by Saturn because with the points, you mainly look at the rulerships. So this is not an exceptionally strong part of fortune. And as far as his ascendant is concerned, we can look here to Venus in Gemini retrograde. Well, geez, I mean, have we ever seen that before? We know that's not exactly a placement where we're going, oh boy. Now, some of you will be familiar with the doctrine of Cazimi and see that this is a Cazimi Venus, which is supposed to make it super wonderful. I tend to adhere to the doctrine that it has to be conjunct in both longitude and latitude. So I'm a little less impressed with Venus as a first house ruler. But certainly, again, it's cadent. So what we have here is what in the old days they would have called mediocre vitality. Now, in our current day, where we have all sorts of wonderful medical systems for dealing with emergencies and for dealing with critical care, as we call it, having a level of mediocre vitality is not necessarily, to be honest, the death sentence that it probably was in William Lilly's day in the 17th century. But mediocre vitality today basically means that if you're looking at somebody living in a country like the UK, that he can probably muddle his way through health issues at least into his 50s and possibly longer, and then he might have some major event, and then he can muddle along again. So that's the general sense with his vitality. As far as his illness pattern, the morbidity piece I mentioned, we have Jupiter ruling his sixth house. It's sitting in the eighth. Oops. Well, I mean, we're all going to die of something, right? But what happens when you have a connection between the sixth and the eighth is a tendency toward chronic disease. Well, now you may well ask, well, what kind of chronic disease? Well, Jupiter rules a couple of areas. It rules primarily the liver. It has to do with the arteries and veins, so this could represent something like, as they used to say, venous conditions, which means poor circulation later on, but he's probably not old enough for that. Jupiter is involved with the lungs, and Jupiter is involved with the hip. So those are the primary things that you would look at. Now, given his birth chart, given that collection of Gemini you see there with Mercury, the the dispositor of those various planets in Gemini. There's a tendency to go toward Gemini issues as a possibility because what Hippocrates said about disease was that oftentimes we get disease in the part of the body that is strongest in our chart. And so as for the areas of disease for Gemini specifically, as well as here the Mercury piece, you think about the shoulders, arms, and hands, but also the lungs. And so when you have somebody who has a sixth house configuration going toward the lungs, that means that if they have a disease in the lungs, it is a stronger disease. And so that's something that we might note in that his nativity is already pointing him toward the direction of exactly what COVID is. So now if we look at his 2019 solar return, I mean, we know this has been a huge year from quite apart from getting COVID, but what we see here is a chart that is highly stressed. Now, how you could go through all the political changes he's gone through, not to mention personal changes without stress, I certainly wouldn't know. But having, as I was calling it all through 2019, the mess in his first house with the moon in Capricorn there as well, in detriment, certainly is screaming, absolutely screaming stress. So we see a definite stress pattern. What you have that is particularly notable here is Mercury ruling the sixth, conjunct Mars in fall, opposite Pluto. Now that's a configuration, considering that Mercury is ruling the sixth, considering that his sun is already in the sixth for the solar return, as well as Venus, which is also, normally in Gemini, there in the sixth, suggests a strong probability of becoming ill in this year. So these are the kind of configurations that you might expect to see for someone who is susceptible to a lung-based disease in this particular year, matching up with the fact that his natal chart shows that propensity as well. So this gives you an idea of, it's not that we had to have, and what rules COVID, we didn't need that. Because what we can do, and this is how you do it in traditional medical astrology, it's not that you need to put a rulership to the name of a disease. You put the rulership to what part of the body is impacted and what is the nature of the impact. Because something like the conditions of COVID, definitely the lungs, definitely a wet disease because of what happens in the lungs. And then you can go from there in terms of your description. Now, this is an example of the kind of situation you could do with horary, with the obvious question that people are having about, am I infected? I have not gotten too many horary questions about, will I be infected? It's been more typically people who have been in a situation where they were worried that they were exposed. And that's what happened in this particular situation. The querent was flying back from Las Vegas, and there was a person on the flight who the querent was very afraid probably did have COVID. And so the obvious question to ask is, am I infected when that happened? When you're concerned about that. So when I looked at this chart, what I was interested in immediately is the condition of the ruler of the first. Now here, that's Saturn. And you see Saturn in the 12th. Now, we talk a lot about Saturn being the malefic. We talk about the 12th as being self-undoing, and you're probably going, oh, geez, this is not so good. We can also look at his first house. You see Neptune there. That wouldn't be my choice. But the point here is Saturn is actually pretty dignified. And so seeing that Saturn was dignified, and there's a specific system in Hellenistic that was developed then called the joys. Saturn joys in the 12th, which is to say Saturn being basically malefic in nature, likes to be in a malefic house. So this is actually a fairly comfortable Saturn. But I think symbolically, the most important piece about this is that Saturn was separating from Pluto. So looking at that, and given what I was told about the circumstances, I concluded that probably that person on the plane was that Pluto, and probably it's true that the person had it. But the sense we have with Saturn separating is that Saturn is escaping from that person. And so that was useful in terms of saying that this isn't as bad as it was perhaps expected or suspected. So the sun at the ascendant, of course, is dawn. You all recognize that signature, which symbolically I take as a hopeful thing anyway. Something is coming to light. The circumstances were not ideal. It's the sun in detriment. But then what you can do is do the rest of what many of us don't like to do, which is follow the rules for death. Okay.
If I may ask for a moment, Lee, just, if I know it wouldn't happen in this current circumstance, but if it was the other way around and Saturn was applying to Pluto,
that would be more dangerous.
It would be more, yeah, because it's coming toward the sick person and their illness.
Yeah, exactly. There are two primary rules for seeing death in a chart. And the two rules are, and then I'm going to define death. Okay. The two primary rules for death are either an approaching aspect between the ruler of the first and the ruler of the eighth, or an approaching aspect between the moon and the ruler of the eighth. Now, this is where I have to define death. And, my attitude about the prediction of death is that it is never, ever, ever absolute. And this is also something where I don't volunteer this information unless somebody specifically asks me the question in a way, as a horary astrologer, where that is my job to tell them, or as a medical astrologer, that is my way to tell them. So, but this chart does not show it. And I'm always happy to volunteer that it doesn't show it. So what we have here is, we have Venus is the ruler of the eighth house here. Venus is in Aries, okay. Not Venus's favorite place either, but the point is that the moon, while applying to Venus, is applying through a sign change and is barely within the traditional 12-degree orb for an aspect. So this is not a strong indicator of death at all. And Saturn is sitting here in the 12th, really not having anything to do with Venus. Venus came out of Pisces, where Venus had sextiled Saturn. She's separating from Saturn. So there's no real strong indicator of death here anyway. The moon here is indicating, in this chart, as I mentioned before, what's called an accidental malefic, because it's ruling the sixth. So when you have an opposition or any aspect between the ruler of the sixth and the eighth, it's not an argument of death. It's an argument of a potential chronic disease. So the worst that this chart indicated was a very slight possibility that the querent would have a chronic disease, but it was not an indicator of death. Now, okay, so that was basically the case. So that was from the client standpoint, that was definitely a good outcome. Now, I promised I would define death. Okay, and I'm not going to do it in terms of a clinical definition. It's more like, what are we talking about when we see death in a chart? The first thing I always tell people when I'm working with them is, death means you would have died of it in the 17th century. And I want you to note what I'm actually saying here, because that indicator of death is something that is more akin to talking about death weather or death, or what Jane Ritter Patrick and I have called a death, a death visa. That it's a time where, so to speak, the veil is thin and death is an alternative. One of the things you don't always appreciate until you actually see someone die is that the body amazingly wants to live. And death is not an inevitable outcome of a particular moment. So when you are reading death, you're reading a tendency toward it. You're reading the fact that death is hovering. You are not reading, and the person must die in this instant. And so that's the point that I wanted to make about defining death. So, but this gives you a general model for the kind of question and how you would set it up. Okay, which takes us to 2020. Now, there are herbs that are being used both in the Chinese pharmacopoeia and in the Western that are basically the herbs to boost immunity. If you're interested in this area, my colleague and friend Will Morris has done a presentation on this that's available to really talk through both sets of herbs. But for example, on the eastern side, astragalus is one of the herbs that's being used. On the west, you've got things like echinacea. Of course, there are things like the mushrooms. All of these various herbs that could promote immunity are things that are also in our astrological literature. And there I might mention something, for example, you've got the herbs like, you have herbs like ginger, which are typical ones that people work with. The classification of COVID as a disease astrologically, which is to say in the traditional medical fashion, is as a cold and wet disease. And so that means that you either have the option of doing what we could call a homeopathic cold and wet, and there you might be talking about something like arsenicum album, or you can do a antipathic, an opposites version, which would be something hot and dry. And so your hot and dries include things like the various cayennes and gingers and so forth. So we can use the astrological system of herbs as a way to perhaps fortify our systems related to this. But I think from a strictly astrological standpoint, it's probably more important to see what the stresses are and what we can do about the stresses. Now here, of course, I've got the chart for what you will remember. Earlier, it seems like forever, January does, but this was, remember, it was the Saturn-Pluto, which was one of the major events for this year. Now, everything that we knew when I was interpreting at the time, it was very clear to me that this was too late as far as being the actual indicator of COVID. And if you're interested in that material, you can go to my blog because I did quite a bit there on looking at the ingress charts to kind of pinpoint the whole process of the disease. The other thing, the one that's coming up, of course, is the Jupiter-Saturn. This occurs December 21st. And so like what we have just had yesterday with the eclipse at 0 Cancer, now we have Jupiter-Saturn at another ingress, the Capricorn ingress. But what a Jupiter-Saturn, because basically using, again, the traditional interpretation, the age of the air mutation actually occurred in 1980 with the eclipse in Libra. But what then happened was in 2000, think tech stocks, we had a Jupiter-Saturn in Taurus. And so what we've been in is what's called a retrogression of the conjunction, which is a period of, in this case, 40 years of basically uncertainty where Earth and air have been fighting it out. In December, that struggle ends. Unfortunately, we are all human beings who can't turn on a dime. And so while you would think 40 years is plenty of time to transition between elements, as living beings, we have the skid marks of all of our past. And so even 40 years isn't necessarily enough to understand the nature of this change. But one of the things I would point out about this is that this conjunction basically creates a situation where everything going on at 0 Aquarius becomes of inordinate importance to us. So here is our conjunction. In Washington, D.C., it's taking place in the 10th house. And so it's an angular conjunction for us, which means, among other things, we become one of the principal sites for what's going to happen with this. What I want to point out to you is the magnitude of what we're going through right now. This was a chart that I drew up for my book, Astrology of Sustainability, where I looked at 3 passes of Pluto through the Jupiter-ruled signs and the Saturn-ruled signs, going back to 1500. But what this gives you is basically the kinds of outer planet conjunctions, starting with the Jupiter-Saturn and then going out to the Saturn-Uranus and further, during each of the passes of Pluto through uh, a sign. And this just gives us a kind of a convenient point. So here we are, and there have been none of these major conjunctions since Pluto went into Capricorn. And we all kind of remember what 2008 was. I'm sure Grace can tell us more than the rest of us on that point. Here we are, and in Pluto and Capricorn, this is the pair, and it's two of them in 1 year. We go on to Pluto and Aquarius, and now we have a Saturn-Neptune, and then 14 years later, we have the next Jupiter-Saturn. So this is more spread out. And you just gaze through here, and you'll see the only other time where there was a grouping that occurred in this case, more or less 1 year, was in the period 1819 to 1821, which was the mutation of the Jupiter-Saturn into Earth, as well, of course, as being the end of the Napoleonic era. So we're in a level of political and change completely equivalent to that. So this is a truly extraordinary year. Now, when I say that the zero Aquarius has become an important point, this was the conjunction on the right for the Mars-Saturn conjunction that occurred this year, March 31st. And so you see, that was at zero Aquarius. What this effectively did is it brought the Jupiter-Saturn into focus earlier and through a conjunction of the malefics, and one where Mars, especially the planet of anger and poison, was conjunct a very dignified Saturn. So we can see that this basically means the whole year feels like that Jupiter-Saturn already. And then finally, what I might mention is that with this idea that zero Aquarius has become, in modern terminology, a sensitive point, here's a chart for the ingress of the sun into zero Aquarius. Normally, we'd never look at this because we look at the cardinal ingresses. But all of a sudden, because of that degree, this becomes important. This occurs January 19th, which is the day before the US presidential inauguration. And this is also the point that since Roosevelt's time, the US inauguration always occurs on January 20th, which is the sun at zero Aquarius. Again, leading to the conclusion that these cycles also link into these bigger cycles. And Aquarius, historically, was seen as a sign associated with epidemics. So, there you have it.
Thank you so much, Lee. That's really interesting. And of course, you could talk on this subject for hours.
Years.
Somebody put their hand up, but put your questions in Q&A. We have a question from Trudy Carroll. Why Aquarius with epidemics?
When the Black Plague occurred in Europe, the astrologer medicos of the University of Paris, the Sorbonne, were asked for the cause of the Black Death. And they responded that it was because of what was called a major conjunction, which was a triple conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in Aquarius. Bad air. Okay. And that prominence of Aquarius in plagues was also noted with Justinian's plague. So this is not a sudden thing. I see the question about my book. The book that I referred to was The Astrology of Sustainability.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Lee. And I'll tell everybody that, Lee is an amazing teacher, and go to her website. I put that website address in the chat box, leelehman.com, and check out her courses. Okay.
Can I say to Lee that one of the dates you have is 1518, And that was the smallpox pandemic in Mexico, and it occurred right after Cortez had killed Montezuma and knocked out the Aztec Empire, and of course probably brought the smallpox with them. And that was Saturn, Pluto, and we are repeating it. So it wasn't hard to figure this was most likely a pandemic.
We literally could go on for hours, and I will just end by saying that the charts I'm looking at don't suggest this is over with until maybe about 2023.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you that question. Yeah, because I'm sure people are out there wondering, what should we be planning for?
It may not all be called COVID-19, because from an astrological standpoint, remember that the traditional medical system was not as wrapped up with names of diseases, and certainly not names of viruses, because they didn't know they existed. So it was more what they saw were maladies by symptom. So this suggests the maladies by system are not going to be over with at the end of 2020.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So we'll all stock up on our herbs.
And toilet paper, no.
And cat litter. There were cat
Right.
litter shortages
Right.
too, which is like toilet paper for cats. Chewy was out of litter. I was like, what?
There's a world coming to.
Yeah.
The world is a-changing.
Mhm.
Okay, so our next speaker is Ann Orderly.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
No.
okay.
Okay.
We're going to move to Ann next. So Ann's going to start her her screen sharing, and
You should see it.
we do. Yes, we see it. And let me just say a bit about you, Ann, although I think a lot of people know who you are for sure. Ann Orderly is a certified astrologer by ESAR CAP, AMAFA, NCGR PAA Level 3, and OPA, of course. She started to study astrology in 1994, and in 2001 became a full-time astrologer with a busy consulting practice in New York City. Since May 1995, she's volunteered for New York City's NCGR chapter and other astrology organizations. She is currently treasurer for OPA and on the board of the Jung Foundation. Since December 1998, Ann's lectured at local, regional, and national conferences for various astrology organizations. She offers 4 weekly podcasts about astrology. So we asked Ann to speak on relationship astrology's value in changing times, because as we all know, things have changed pretty rapidly for us in a few months, and we are all at home with people that we chose a long time ago when we could also go out and do other things. So Ann writes, relationships are being asked to change and restructure during the incredible changes taking place in our world. Tossed into an alchemical cauldron, cooking all of us, we find strange cracks and pressures in places we didn't expect. Explore how to use astrology to help you negotiate the shifts in your relationships and yourself. So, welcome, Ann.
Thanks, Kay. So off we go. So the value of relationships in, using astrology as a tool. And I'm a Virgo. I like to fix things, or I like to suggest alternate ways to use the energy. The reason I fell in love with astrology when I ran into it in 1994 was like, this is like our user manual. And before that, I had been a computer programmer. And when you program computers, there's things that can go wrong in weird ways, and you kind of get into an endless loop, or you get into go off into a dark space, because I programmed back in the 1977 when computers were first evolving to sit on your desks. So one of the things I loved about astrology is we can look at relationships as our programming. We can look at our chart as our programming, and we look at the connections we have. Saturn is exalted in Libra, and Libra, of course, is the sign of relationships. So we know that that's and we go, why is it exalted? I always like to say, well, why would Saturn be exalted in Libra? Because relationships are work. And Saturn is where we are asked to do the work of our lives. Whatever your Saturn is, by sign and house placement, that is your work in this world, in this incarnation. And when we look at our charts and we think about it, and you just kind of think, like big picture, if Saturn's exalted in Libra and we're having a square from Capricorn, right? We're having a challenge to the structures of our relationships just by Saturn being in Capricorn, squaring the concept of Libra. And all of us are doing this big crisis, in the opening squares. If we say Libra is all relationships, it's an opening square. It's a challenge. It's a crisis. It's an opportunity for us to take action about our relationships. And literally, we're seeing all of our relationships to everything, because Saturn rules our structures, being Pluto transformed, dissolved. I like Pluto as an alchemical cooking. The analogy I'll use with my clients is, you're a little caterpillar, you're happy, you got a nice leaf, you got a little friendly caterpillar next to you, and then a string comes out of your butt, and you go, I got to make a cocoon. And this little thing, and you go in it, you get all black and gunky and dissolve, and then you hatch, and you have wings, and they dry out, and you fly, and you eat nectar. And so when you're saying that to the caterpillar, they kind of go, yeah, perfectly happy here on my leaf with my friend. But as you know, we've all gone into our houses, our cocoons. We've been told to, turn into a little black gunky thing. We're morphing into a new thing. We don't know what it is. And we're all black and gunky. But in that black and gunky transformation that we're cooking in, we're going to talk about how to hang out with the fellow caterpillars who may be still caterpillars, and maybe some of your people have turned into butterflies, and maybe some wind came along and blew the cocoon off, and who knows where they went. And so if we think about this time as a period of transformation in all of our structures, but most importantly, our relationships, it kind of helps for us to go, okay, in this moment, what can I do, right? So because our relationships are being forced to change, they're not asked, but they're being forced, we're modifying and we're shifting with this pandemic. And the pandemic consists of the COVID clump. I call it the COVID clump. Pluto, Saturn, and Capricorn, and then Jupiter makes everything bigger. He just makes it bigger. So it's big stuff. And we're finding strange cracks in our relationships. So when we're discussing our you and me, how do we connect? What do we do? All of our life experiences come to us through our relationships. And as the planets travel around the heavens and around our natal chart, we pull in people who come for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. We also know that Saturn's exalted in relationships. They work, they shape our lives, and they create our experiences. With Saturn and the other planets in Capricorn forming a conjunction, they're also squaring all of the planets that we have in action-oriented signs, because they're in an action-oriented sign, they're in a cardinal sign. But that union of the three of them, it also is creating a whole bunch of new cycles in our life, particularly in our relationships to virtually everything. So I want you to think back to what you were doing in the fall of 1982, November of 82, spring of 83. That's when Saturn and Pluto last met. And if you were older, in the 40s, some of you are older to go back to that one, what was going on for you in 1991 when Saturn was last at this part of the sky? What was going on for you in the spring of 93, spring of 91? What was going on for you in the spring of 93? Because that's where your progressed moon was. What was emotionally you're processing? What was going on for you in 80 when Jupiter and Saturn met, and in 2000 when they met again, and they're going to meet again in November? And then last, of course, what was going on in November, December of 2007 and January of 2008 when Jupiter and Pluto met? What's happening is all of those conjunctions are all happening in the same place in your chart. So it's pulling 82, 91, 93, 2000, 80, and 2007, pulling them all into like this one little pot. You kind of went all over your life and pulled them into this space that are saying, okay, let's create new stuff. A conjunction ends things, end things. And we're ending, we started that conjunction in January, and the closing aspect of Jupiter-Pluto is at the same degree as the January, November 13th. And then the Saturn, Jupiter say, new relationships as of December of this year. So we're just cooking for the whole year. You just got to go cooking for the whole year. No idea. But then I got to spend time in my cocoon with these people. What do I do? So this is where we're going to talk about how you can work with the relationships and make it a little easier on yourself and the people that you're hanging out with. Because the natal charts hold the solution to every relationship you encounter. That's just the way they do. So first we're going to look at the chart step by step. You want to think of the planet in every sign has both strengths and weaknesses. So some, they're in a different sign, they do a certain thing, they behave in a certain way, and you want to use an approach which pitches to the strengths of the planet by sign. They all have weaknesses, but to help you with the relationships, figure out what the strengths are of that planet in a sign. You want to think of planets as actors or behaviors in your life. The sign and the house placement offers keyword about how the planet acts and where it behaves itself, where it acts out its stuff. Fire planets flare up and are passionate. Air planets like to communicate and breeze. Earth planets like to do things and ground things. Water planets flow and feel. Plus, they also take the shape of the environment they're in. They change shape based on the size of the vase or the cup. And they also absorb energy. You want to get a good rulership book. Lee has a great one. I like Mike Mancasey's. I like Rex Bill's. But you want to get a good rulership, because when you're in a time like this where Saturn is saying you have to do the work, you want to have a lot of keywords, and you want to expand your keywords, because a lot of times we get in ruts. We do the same thing over and over again. Get a list of things that the planets like to do, which allows you to get different ideas about what every sign is interested in. The planet will do those behaviors in the house it's living in. And if you're moved, use your natal chart plus your relocated chart to get ideas. So the idea is every planet's got good and bad by sign. Think about what they like to do, and then get some extra words that you can give them to do, because we tend to be creatures of habit. How old is each planet in the chart? So determine the age of the planet. Look at the degree to get the age in years. In a little circle on the end. Divide the minutes by 5 to get the months. So if the chart has a 4-degree and 2-month-old Venus, that Venus wants very different things than a 24-year-old Venus does, which is a Venus at 24 degrees. So you want to relate to the planet with age-appropriate things based on the age of the planet. So I was talking to a client the other day, and he has a 2 degrees Pisces moon in the 7th house. And he's trying to decide what to do about the relationship he's in. And I said to him, you're 2. Your emotional relationship stuff is 2 years old. You got to go pick up little 2-year-old you and hold him and hug him and help him. He's like, I'm 2? He goes, I feel like I'm 2. And of course, it's a Pisces moon, so it's, working on his abandonment stuff, right? So if you get the age of the planet, you can help it understand how you can look at the planet and see that's a 5-year-old planet. And sometimes when you say to somebody, how old are you right now? They go, I'm 5. And they got Mars at 5 degrees. It's really works. Just trust me on this. And just, and then you take the keywords and add to it. You're going to combine the keywords about the behaviors each sign does with the action each planet wants to take and make it age appropriate. For example, it wouldn't be appropriate for a 3-year-old Mars and Aries to play with the knife, but going to a firing range at 25 is very appropriate for a 25-year-old Aries Mars. So if you think about, well, what would a little 3-year-old, it would probably want to play cops and robbers, and you chase them around the house. That, it's different energies. And of course, if you're a grown-up and you have somebody with 3-year-old Mars, they like you to chase them around the house. This is fun, right? So when we look at these, and so now you've got an idea of what the planets are, how old they are, you've got a list of things they like to do, good and bad, by rulerships. And really, every astrologer needs a couple of rulership books. It makes your astrology so much better. So you've got these 2 lists for your chart and the chart you're relating to. And now we're going to figure out how to pitch to the strengths of that chart. And we apply our basic rules of synastry. And synastry, for you, those of you who are newer, that's the term for how the two charts talk to each other.
Anne, if I could interrupt for a minute,
Yep.
we have a question from Sheila.
Mhm.
No one gets older than 30? Like,
Start again.
you start
So
again.
you start again. You get back to 30 and you do it again. And when you get to 60, you do it again. So I had one guy, he had a Venus at 0. I was teaching this. He goes, well, my Venus is 0. I said, okay. He said, well, does it mean I'm only going to fall in love at 0? I'm like, no, what happened when you were 30? And he goes, oh, that's when I met my wife. And he was older. And I said, so what happened when you were 60? And he goes, oh, that's when my granddaughter was born. And he got this big grin. And I said, 2 Venuses. So it repeats. And then, of course, as planets go through it, they activate it. Article on my website about the pinball approach to astrology. But the basic moment when you get to know the planet is the age of the planet. So I have Saturn at 6. At age 6, I was told I was not like the Blessed Virgin. And I punched little boys in the cloakroom so I couldn't be in the May parade, right? I was shamed for my passions because I punched this kid out because I didn't like what he did to me. But I remember that, you know, and I have stories at 36, and I'm going to have another one this year because I'm turning 66. But I'm, you know, really getting to know your Saturn. But yes, you get to know, but it helps you in dealing with a person to know how old the planet is, because you pitch, you know, what you're going to pitch to a 2-year-old Venus is a little glitter and sparkle and letting her paint your fingernails with some purple makeup, purple nail polish, as opposed to a 32-year-old Venus. But she's going to want different things, but she's still the little 2-year-old, right? So it's helpful if you know the age of the planet. And when they go to their lower place, they go to their lower place at the age they are, you know. So when you're dealing with someone and they're having a temper tantrum, I had one guy bring a mailer here, you know, like used to send out postage mail, you know, postage meter, and he couldn't get it to go, and he stamped his feet like, and I just kind of looked at him and I went, you're like a grown man stamping your feet in my office. And, you know, I'm a nosy thing, so I'd asked him his birthday, and didn't even have a 5-year-old Aries Mars. He was a salesman, he was good, but when he was frustrated, blah, 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 stamping, I mean, honest to God, he stamped his feet, and I'm like, okay, you know. But when you know that, it helps you work with the energy, because you're not judging it, you're just observing it, and you go, okay, obviously he's stamping his feet. Can I help? No, I got to let him deal with his frustration, right? Yeah.
Okay, so Anne, I may be slow on this, and this is new. I've never heard this technique before. So let's say that 5-year old Aries Mars for this man. When he's 5 years old, something that happens, it triggers him. Now, when he's 35, is he still, he's 5 years old, or is he 35?
He's always 5. He's always 5.
He's always 5, no matter how old he is. Okay.
Yeah, it always goes back to that age. It's a solar arc technique, kind of tied to the Uranian. But if you think of the planet as that age, that's the way it initially, I mean, obviously there's other planets that weigh in and say, hey, you know, behave yourself, you know, don't stomp your feet in front of a new client. You're like, you know, and I'm kind of just watching him stomp his feet. You know? But, you know, when we're working with a frustrated planet, it goes to the age it is. It goes right there. Right.
Okay. And Sherry Horn Hassan has a question that's, you know, so are you saying that a younger planet has more evolutionary work to do in terms of growing in consciousness? So that's what we can do as individuals. We see our own young planets and our partners' young planets, and then we understand how to work with those consciously.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of times our older planets boss around our younger planets. You know, our older planets will go, you're not supposed to do that. And the younger planet goes, but I want to stamp my feet. And I'm like, it wants to stamp its feet. Let it stamp its feet. You know, like give it permission to stamp it. Say, why don't you go out for a run? Yeah, I could use a run. You know, it's feeding the planet what it needs to make it happy. Pitch to its strength. What does Mars and Aries need to do? It needs to hunt. He's a salesperson. He hunts. But when he's frustrated, he doesn't want to fix it. It's Aries. He wants to talk.
So speaking of Aries, we have another question from Sherry that, you know, a 0 degrees Aries person is always working with that infant energy, imagine, that has to be really fed, I would say, security, right? I mean, yeah.
They kick their legs. Think
Yeah.
about a little zero baby. You remember a couple weeks ago, there was the baby mem. They had that little baby born in Brazil with his face on it, like this. And of course, I looked, it had a 0 Aries. And it's like it arrived in the world, it was like, looked like this. And they were like, look at how mad it is. I'm like, it's got 0 Aries. This got pulled out of its mother into this loud room. It is not happy. But then it goes, all right, I'm here. Now what do I have to do? Right? So it also how we initiate things. You initiate things with that first up planet. Aries gets activated, goes, okay, I got to do something. It's the first step. It's first at bat. Right? That makes sense?
That makes sense. And then Sherry asks, so older planets are better able to teach or serve as examples to others?
Yeah.
Does that work?
But they also can be bossy. You know,
Yeah.
you can have a 25-year-old Venus looking at the 5-year-old stomping and going, hey, you know, be a little judgmental. But if it knows it's a 5-year-old, it goes, okay, go do 5-year-old things and come back and then you'll be happy. You know, remember the higher part of the 5-year-old. They come and they bring you flowers. You know, I was on Fire Island one time. We came out of the house and there was a little baby deer and we lived near where the kids all lived, like a dorm for the kids, the workers on the island, you know, the babysitters and the lifeguards and all that, the camp counselors. And there was a deer there and there were 2 little boys who were 8 and they were feeding pizza to the deer, right? They were being really helpful little boys, feeding pizza to the deer. And my friend and I kind of stopped and we were like, oh, that's so cute. And then this guy comes out of the building next door. He goes, kids, don't feed the pizza to the deer. And they turned and they were like, you know, the deer wanted the pizza. The boys wanted to feed the pizza. It's like, why are you giving this kid a hard time about feeding pizza to the deer? Everybody's happy. Don't interrupt. You know, it was they were doing what they wanted to do to be helpful, to be good Mars. Good Mars wants to serve, wants to help, wants to give you something. And they were holding the pizza for the deer. And so it's honoring what the planet how the planet wants to express. And then you're working with you're supporting it. You know, and that graciousness of Mars, because he does like to do things for you when he's not in the mood to fight with you or have sex with you or
All
take
right. So we should move on. We have more questions. Maybe, Anne, you should offer a course just on the age of the planets.
On the age of the planets, yeah. It's like fun. Go read the pinball article on my website. Okay. All right, so conjunctions or trines are where the planets get each other. They want to enjoy the same thing. Adjust the pitch based on the strengths. If you're working with the Taurus moon, give a cuddle to a 3-year-old, a shovel and dirt to dig into a 4-year-old, a piece of chocolate to 8-year-old, sparkly jewelry to a 12-year-old, romance to 20, and a garden to design to a 28-year-old. What does Taurus moon want? How do you pitch to it? If it's a Virgo moon, replace with Virgo words: organizing, cleaning, improving, editing, helping, reading, whatever. Oppositions are where the 2 planets look across at each other. They're often incompatible energies, so they want to relate or perhaps disagree. Earth and water make mud, fire and air expand each other. They feed off each other. So the energy does want to cooperate, even if they disagree so you want to kind of look for the places to cooperate, especially based, and of course, if it's an opposition, based on the ages. So if it's 3-year-old opposition with your partner's 3-year-old something, or it's a 20-year-old, they're going to have different things. Pitch to the strengths. And try and play rally tennis, where you hit the ball back and forth, not killer tennis, because oppositions tend to do killer. And, somebody has to win or lose. So the goal is you're living with this person. How do you relate, right? Squares get a bad reputation. We think of them as arguing. Oh, my God, it's square. Their moon squares my Saturn. But you want to reframe the square and pitch to the strengths. When you sit on a couch, your legs are at 90 degrees. They're at an angle, the square angle. And you have to work your energy. You have to push up to get off the couch. You have to work with your square limbs to move. So if we think of squares as working together, they get stuff up. If we think of them as arguing, they argue. And it's our choice how we approach the squares. If we have similar age, 25-year-old Aries moon and a Capricorn moon in a relationship, send the Aries moon on an errand while the Capricorn moon finishes their work. And, why don't you go run and get the groceries? Go hunt for the groceries, honey, while I finish doing this thing here. And then everybody's happy because they're feeding what they need. Inconjuncts always need some kind of adjustment. There's no getting around it. And you have to think they're either going to be an Aries Virgo shape or they're going to be an Aries Scorpio shape. That's the energetic profile of inconjuncts. So sometimes it's best to let the Aries planet go off and do their thing while the Virgo planet organizes and cleans up and the Scorpio planet figures out the psychological reason. So you have to think of the shape, put the slower moving planet on the ascendant, and that's the apex. And then you go, is it a Virgo shape or is it a Scorpio shape? And then you've got the energetic dynamic. And that I know people are going to ask questions. I'm not going to answer them. We got too much to do. But the idea is when you look at inconjuncts, there's always an adjustment. They're in different signs, they're in different elements, they're in different modes. They don't get each other. But the Virgo and Scorpio planets can talk to the Aries and talk about how to be more strategic, but you have to adjust. Any inconjunct, adjust. It's kind of like a teeter-totter. If you think of the symbol, it's got the little thing. When you're on a teeter-totter and you hold somebody up in the air and you make their legs dangle, but it works best if you're kind of going like this, right? Back and forth. Next, now that we have a plan, we're going to look at each planet and what it's trying to accomplish. Mercury plays an enormous role in all relationships. Sure, a lot of times you see him, you want to get naked, you want to whatever, but Mercury is the most important because to create anything in our lives, including our most important relationships, we have to go through air, ideas, inspiration, fire, emotion, water, and creation, earth. And ideas are Mercury's realm, so he goes first. And he's always, I think he is perhaps the most important planet in any relationship because the other ones, Mercury is how we negotiate in the relationship. And now we're going to connect the dots. So with Mercury, we're going to communicate or have trouble communicating based on our Mercury by age, sign, and placement. Issues in relationships often surface to Mercury not being heard or being able to express himself. So let's say you have a 3-year-old Mercury in water. How does he talk? He feels. He has trouble with words, right? They tend to know things, and sometimes, like little kids, you know, well, the keys are there. Well, the keys are there. Well, and then the parent doesn't listen to them. Water Mercuries can have trouble finding words because it's not a natural energy for water. Look at the aspects between your Mercuries. How do they communicate? And then my old sales boss used to say, remember, 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen as much as you talk. For Venus, she represents how we connect, how we feel valued, how we value others. She rules love. And when we have conflict, she's the first to feel it. You want to suck up to Venus. You want to bribe Venus. You want to value Venus. In mythology, she used to get really nasty when she was disrespected. And if we think about divorces, they center around those Venus issues because Venus is taking it out via legal fields, arguments, conflicts about how valuable you are to the former partner, how valuable they are to you. And so you want to kind of think of Venus as the lubricant. What does partner's Venus want by sign, age, and house? Give to Venus. She's very generous. She comes back to you often threefold if you give her stuff. If you withhold from her, she gets really mean and you're withholding the lubricant of the relationship. Always important when you're first learning astrology, go read on the myths of Venus, go read on the myths of Mercury, get an idea of how they work. You know, we sometimes say Geminis are con artists or thieves. Well, why? Well, Mercury the first thing he did was he stole his brother's cows, Gemini's story, right? Like get your mythology because then you're going to understand what the mythology of Venus is. And then you're going to look at her by sign and house placement, and you're going to see how does she want to act out her myth in your chart, in your life. You want to be generous with your partner's Venus by sign, house, and age, so they will feel appreciated and loved. I had one woman come, and she had Venus at 4 Capricorn, and her husband used to bring her, she had Mars and Cancer sextiling the Venus. He would bring her a cup of hot chocolate while she was in the shower in the morning. And every morning he would bring her a cup of hot chocolate. And he served her Venus, he fed her Venus, and she was really happy, you know. And I'm like, a cup of hot chocolate, huh? Okay, well, it's a 4-year-old Venus. What does a 4-year-old Venus want? You know, 23, she might want a diamond in the tub, you know, but it was 4. She wanted the chocolate. So value their Venus, be generous with their Venus. It doesn't take anything. Give to their Venus and their Venus goes, oh, I'm so happy. Mars, of course, represents action, war, fighting, not getting what you want or getting what you want, and sex. Frequently when clients complain they're arguing, I say, how's the sex life? They go, we're not having sex. I'm like, you know, because you're having fights. You want to encourage the other person to take action to get what they want. And how are you encouraging them to do it? Remember, if Mars is behaving badly, he's frustrated. If you're arguing, someone's frustrated. Someone's Mars is frustrated because stomp, 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 that guy with the 5-year-old Mars and Aries. You want to figure out how to pitch to the Mars by age, sign, and house. And you want to distract it with other things Mars likes. This is where it's helpful to get Lee Lehman's book on keywords or someone's book and make a list of Mars things that Mars would like and suggest it, make it age appropriate. Don't give a 5-year-old Mars and Aries a chainsaw. But, a 25-year-old, say, can you go out and cut the logs in the backyard? You want to know it's primal. It's very basic. It's not, my old astrology teacher used to say, meat, mattress, and malt. It's very basic. You can also move Mars and redirect its focus because when it's focused on something, it's going to go for it. And remember, it likes to take action. So point out paths that your Mars can follow, or your partner's Mars, or whoever you're having trouble with. Point out things that they might be able to do to take action to not be frustrated. And then the moon is easiest. It invites us to self-nurture. It describes the most primal, soothing energy. Give to the moon what she wants. Cuddle up, settle down, be happy. Remember, there are moons that get happy by fighting, and Aries moon likes to fight. So give her a good fight about something you don't care about. And yes, it works. Sometimes you just got to fight with the moon. Just fight about something you don't like, because the moon in Aries likes to fight. So give it a fight. A little argument about something you don't care about, because it's like, you're like, all right, I know you like to yell. It's good. We have to honor that it came in as a fighting moon, or whatever it is, Virgo moon. It likes to criticize. You go, okay, I know you're criticizing. What would you improve? Make the pitch to the Virgo to improve. And last but not least, Saturn. The Saturn placement's why you have that person in your life. Period. End of story. Saturn rules time. If you're going to have someone in your life for a while, you're going to have some kind of Saturn aspect. You're supposed to do your Saturn. They're supposed to do theirs. Remember, Saturn's exalted in Libra because it's the sign of relationships, and relationships are work. Everybody's Saturn wants to build something by sign and house placement of lasting value, because that's what Saturn wants to do. He wants to accomplish something. You're in a Saturn body. It's the glue in any relationship that makes you stay and do it again and again and again. He also rules time. He's Chronos. Chronos clocks. Remember the old guy on New Year's Eve and the little baby, right? If you're at a critical Saturn phase in a relationship with someone at one of the square or one of the hard aspects, 7.5, 14 and 7 and 2/5 quarter, 14.5, 22, 28 to 29, you have to make some kind of adjustment or change, or the hard aspect will work to release the relationship. You have to take action, either committing or changing or adjusting or ending it. It's not negotiable. Saturn doesn't negotiate. He goes, is this of value? Is this helping you grow? If it is, great. Make the adjustment, commit to it, have the baby, get married, buy the house, sell the house. But if you don't, and I always ask people when they're talking, how long you been with them? 7 years. I'm like, all right, we got to make an adjustment. Now, you don't always leave. I had one client come, and she was at the 14.5 years. Husband was played around the whole time they'd been together. And I said, well, the window for making the change is like through October. And then if you don't make the change, you're going to be there for another 7 years. Because, 7 years ago, you had a problem too, right? She goes, I did. And 7 years ago, I went to see this other astrologer. And he said to me, yeah, you're not going to leave. You're at a crossroads, but you're not going to leave. And I looked at her and I said, and you didn't. And she looked at me like, and I went, oh, yeah, all right. I just blew her out. She did come back when she got to 22.5 years, because then she'd met somebody that she was maybe thinking of leaving for. Again, she's still there, and now they're coming up on 29 years. So we'll see what happens. But it is a critical turning point at that age. And it's the work that the person's supposed to do in this world by sign, house, and age. And right now, Saturn's under enormous stress due to his conjunctions with Pluto. I'm going to throw Athena in, because our job with this is to think strategically about what we were doing. I like to put her in there and say, think before you do it. And then Jupiter. Also, encourage your relationships to lean into their Saturns. Do your Saturn every day. Do it even when you don't want to. He does not accept bribes. You can bribe Venus, you can't bribe Saturn. Only with good old-fashioned work, doing your Saturn by sign, age, and house. Do it every day. You do yours, they do theirs. Do not do the other person's Saturn. When someone comes to me and says, tell me what I should do, I go, nah, you're trying to give me your Saturn. I'm going to give you your options. You get to pick. I'm not in charge of your Saturn. You've got to do yours. And then pitch to the strengths of their Saturn. In this case, I would reference you to Liz Green's book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. When I first read that book, I highlighted all the sections. I went into therapy, gave it to my therapist, said, you have to read this. This is what I got. She came back and she said, go read the white parts. Read the parts you didn't highlight. I'm like, read the white parts, man. And I read the white parts. And basically it was, I know you're afraid of it, do it anyway. And that's Saturn. That's your pitch with Saturn. I know you're afraid of it, you have to do it anyway. And you want to encourage Saturn to do the right thing and do the work of the person's Saturn. And again, if it's a 6-year-old Saturn, it might be a little upset. If it's a 22-year-old Saturn, it goes, all right, I got to do it again. I know I always have to do this. And that's okay. Saturn does not accept bribes, and you do have to do the work. In these times of intense transformation, which we all signed up for because we're here right now going through it. That's important to remember. We're all sitting here on the edge of history going, oh my God, what's going to happen tomorrow? You want to keep your relationships supported with these techniques, and you want to use the wonderful vehicle of astrology to support, sustain, grow, and help your relationships grow, and then you grow too. And that would be it. So live happily ever after and gallop off into the sunset.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne. That was really lovely.
Good. I'll stop my share.
Very inspiring. And I think to sum up, the fact that you really point out how we need to work with the strengths, right? The strengths of each planet, the strengths of the signs, be proactive. And that's what will help us understand ourselves and our partners.
Yeah. And think about what that planet really wants to do and let it do it. Encourage it to do it. If you're Virgo something, it wants to organize and clean things. Say, here, you want to clean the closet? Happy camper. My brother used to go and clean things out. And my mother was like, and he would, you would just throw, she had Venus and Virgo, so you didn't throw away her stuff. But he would just kind of, because he had Virgo and he needed to clean. And I'm like, go for it, but that is his job. And now he's in Palm Springs and he's taking care of all of his neighbors, all the old people he's shopping for. He needs to do Virgo things, right? So it's really allowing the planets to do their best at their age and not to expect more of them if they're 5. A 5-year-old can only do so much, but you want to support the 5-year-old in helping it do its thing.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you so much. We have more questions, but we're going over the time. So people can contact you at anneorderly.com and read many of your interesting blogs.
And I would encourage you to do the pinball, because that I explain at much greater depth how to do the age thing. And also, Noel Till has a great book on solar arcs, which some of that's it's also from Uranian. I studied Uranian astrology, and Vedic astrology also ranked planets by age, which we kind of do with horary. 0 to 3, we don't know how old it is. 27 to 29, it's done already. So think of the planets as ages. It really, really helps. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we move to Greg. So as Greg begins to share his screen, I encourage you all to take a few deep breaths. We're spending a lot of time on screens these days, and so maybe take a stretch. And let me tell you a little bit about Greg. So Greg has PhD and is a MFT. He has practiced astrology professionally since 1981 and is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Greg is also a lecturer in psychology at Sonoma State University, where he teaches courses on adult development, myth, dreams, Jungian depth psychology, and the psychology of yoga. In October 2020, Ibis Press will publish his newest work, Astrology's Higher Octaves. Greg is also the author of Astrology and Spiritual Awakening, Therapeutic Astrology, Planets in Therapy, Predictive Technique and the Art of Counseling, and Astrology and Meditation, the Fearless Contemplation of Change. So as Greg provides his reflections on vocational astrology in a pandemic era, he wrote to us, during this time of uncertainty, clients will ask us for guidance, some of them anxious and afraid, and our ability to help depends on our having achieved a calm center. This comes from understanding in realistic terms the current transiting situation affecting everyone, and also the implications and possibilities of one's personal transits and what they're asking each of us to do here and now. Greg's presentation will show that vocational astrology involves analysis of birth charts to guide occupational choices, but is also a process of supporting counseling and spontaneously eliciting meaning at moments of heightened intensity and urgency. So I'm delighted to introduce Greg to you and to listen to his wise counsel about vocational astrology. So it's up to you, Greg, and
thanks, Kay.
and you're
Well,
so
with
welcome.
Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto currently transiting in Capricorn most of this year, it's a very good time for us to focus on vocational astrology, the art of guiding ourselves and others in the world of work to aid our decision-making, but also to cope with setbacks, workplace stress, burnout, unemployment, changes of occupation, and so forth. This is a key area of our societal life where the services of astrologers are most impactful and likely to be of great future demand. And this knowledge is especially helpful to us during times of crisis like we are living through. So this spring's conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto marked the inception of the epidemic, and most of this summer, August through December, will have Mars in Aries, retrograde, squaring Saturn and Pluto. So it's possible it could spread further. We know Pluto signifies infectious disease. Mars can be an inflammatory influence. So we're dealing with this difficult virus. And the Saturn-Pluto conjunction imposes strict controls on us. It shows our need to endure difficult circumstances and to strip down to the basics, to simplify. So we have to bear down and accomplish what we can at home and try and stay healthy and respond with calm and poise and equanimity. And I also like to emphasize the Jupiter conjunction to Pluto, which can signify the emergence of strong personalities capable of leadership, capable of managing big projects, organization. So as Kay already said, yeah, during this time, people are going to be calling us for guidance, and often in states of anxiety. They're afraid of what's happening, and we can only guide them if we have gained a calm center and understanding of what is happening on the planet and what it asks each of us to do here and now. We can't claim to have all the answers about how to cope with this crisis, but we astrologers are comfortable thinking on our feet because we know we're always in a fluid, changing situation, even now. And the advice I offer people now is not really that much different than I would give under normal circumstances, which is we have to act from within our natal pattern and the tendencies and potentials our natal chart indicates. And also, we should point ourselves in the direction of the current transiting energy. So for example, looking at the house position of our current Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto conjunction. And Saturn, most of this remaining part of the year, will be retrograde back into Capricorn, so remaining with Jupiter and Pluto. So this combination of planets where it's transiting shows where we can work constructively to advance in our enterprises, where we have to cultivate maturity in response to adversity and challenge. So this is a chart of someone who I consulted with a week or so ago, and she was questioning her career. She is a divorced single mother, and she is a special education teacher. During her Saturn return just a few years ago, she got her credentials in teaching and education, and she had some questions like, should I change careers? But it seemed like the structure of her occupational life was already set in place during that Saturn return in Sagittarius. Where she could advance herself is in getting her master's in education. So that's what she's sort of gearing up to do. But more importantly, you see the transiting Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn down in the 4th house. And extensive work is happening at home. She's doing intense renovations, expensive but necessary, to get the house in order. And then you notice Uranus over in her 7th house. She's in a pretty new relationship, but they're already having some pretty serious talks about whether to have him move in and have him really become part of the clan. So the energy is in the area of family consolidation and reorganization. So that's how she's using the 3 planets transiting her 4th house cusp and into her 4th house. Another example, I don't have the chart, is someone who has the transit of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in her 6th house. And she is a business owner. The business has had to close down during the pandemic, but she is working tirelessly on behalf of her employees. She has 8 people who work for her as contractors and employees, and she's been working around the clock to get them funding, to figure out how they can get unemployment and small business grants. So the 6th house emphasis shows working on behalf of the workers. So I want to give you a few vocational astrology starting point, because the basics still apply as always. We find orientation by examining the natal signs, sign and house placement, Saturn's sign and house placement, planets closely aspecting the midheaven or the ascendant. And I'll give you some examples in a few minutes. Planets aspecting the lunar nodes, or planets in the 6th or 10th house. And just for an example, look at the chart of Eddie, which features 6 planets in his 6th house: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn. And he is always at work. He is always in the workplace in law enforcement. He supervises 120 employees. So his life is all about his work and his workers and training. The 6th house, its ruler, planets placed in the 6th house concern the place and conditions of employment and the relations between employer and employee, no matter which side of that we're on. So it's also situations of training where skills are developed, where the 10th house defines or influences our calling, ambitions, or sought after social rank. We also want to look at the placement and aspects of the midheaven ruler and the final dispositor of the MC using the Noel-Till midheaven extension process. And so I'm just going to give you one very brief example of this. The chart of Picasso. He worked in varied material arts. You know, he has 4 planets in Taurus. And he molded a new vision of reality from his imagination. You see, Saturn is conjunct Pluto. He anchored the imagination. His midheaven ruler, Mars, is governed by the moon, which is in Sagittarius, which is disposited by Jupiter in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, which is in her home sign of Libra. And Venus sextiles the moon in the 5th house of creativity. So it's this kind of thinking through the chain of rulerships that can lead us to an understanding of a person's occupational profile. Now, just a few examples of aspects to the midheaven and ascendant. and lunar nodes. Well, they'll have to suffice for this brief presentation. So country music superstar Taylor Swift has Venus square her midheaven. It's a symbol of her music, her beauty. Microsoft founder Bill Gates has Uranus, the planet of technology, science, innovation, and media, rising at the ascendant. NBA basketball superstar Stephen Curry has Mars closely squaring the midheaven, symbol of a warrior, an intense competitor. You'll also note his ascendant ruler, Sun, is conjunct the North Node, which here indicates a superstar. I don't have Rachel Maddow's chart with me today, but she has Sun exactly squaring the nodal axis. Media mogul and newspaper publisher and Fox News owner Rupert Murdoch. He has ascendant ruler Saturn in Capricorn, squaring the nodal axis. And you see Uranus, that planet of media, conjunct the North Node. So these show his authority, his social influence, his promoting his own agenda of social change, and his vast media empire. That's Saturn squaring the nodes. And you note that the ruler of the midheaven, Mercury, is conjunct the Sun, which rules the 9th house of publishing. So that's his profile. We see Elvis here, Elvis Presley, Venus conjunct the North Node down in the 2nd house. Great performing musician. Thanatologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose work revolutionized our society's understanding of death and dying and spawned the hospice movement. She had Sun Pluto conjunct the North Node. That's an apt symbol for someone who wrote about death and dying. And the controversial and beloved Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche had Sun Jupiter squaring the nodal axis. Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. It is not square the nodal axis. My bad. But he does have Sun conjunct Jupiter. Now, here's another example pertaining to the nodes. Francesca was a few years past her first Saturn return, but she had not yet settled on an occupational path. She'd gone back to college, but she was undecided on her major. Transiting Saturn was approaching natal Neptune in the 9th house. She was very involved with spirituality, meditation, metaphysics, and philosophy, but she really needed to decide on something practical. I noted she had Mars conjunct the nodal axis in Capricorn, trining her ascendant. And I asked if she was interested in athletics or competitive sports. I asked if she'd ever considered becoming a physical education teacher. She said, all my life I've been into athletics, training, fitness, yoga, somatic psychology. Actually, I can't think of anything I'd enjoy more than teaching yoga and martial arts and sports training to kids. She also had Mars sextile Mercury, which is great for a coach, you know, strong, assertive verbal skills that a coach needs to bark out orders to a team. So the intuitive suggestion that I made emerged through process work. It was resonant with her interests. It didn't come out of following some set formula for chart interpretation. It emerged spontaneously out of a process-oriented session where meaning was sharpened through dialogue and meditation. And this is always the approach I favor. Now here's another example of this process-oriented approach. Oops, wrong chart. To astrological counseling. An unemployed man named David consulted me just before his second Saturn return. He'd been out of work for several years and he was discouraged. Natally, he had Neptune and Saturn in the 6th house, and transiting Saturn was currently conjunct his natal Neptune, passing over it several times. He said his situation felt hopeless. It seemed that no one was interested in hiring a 58-year-old man without a college education. A recovering drug addict and alcoholic, sober for a decade, he was struggling with loss of faith, natal Saturn and Neptune conjunction. For someone with Saturn in the sixth house, being employed is very important to a sense of stability and security. It's a necessary component of the life structure. David had been working since age 15, since his first Saturn opposition, and he had held innumerable jobs. I contemplated the meaning of natal Saturn in Scorpio, in the sixth house. I asked, have you ever done any work involving energy, chemistry, or chemical reactions? Given that Scorpio symbolizes transforming energies. I was just guessing here, using the symbolism to stimulate my intuition. He said, indeed, he had once worked for several years in a chemical factory. Keying on Saturn's conjunction with Neptune, I suggested he might apply to work at the local electrical and water utility companies, where the focus was on energy generation. I counseled him that during the remaining months of Saturn retrograde and its station near Neptune, his situation might continue to be ambiguous, unclear, and formless. It might take some time for things to clarify and take form. But nonetheless, he could apply for a few positions. See, we understand Neptune represents uncertainty. We can counsel people when appropriate to anticipate that, to yield to it, to allow it. Referencing David's Taurus sun in the first house, I believed he could project the identity of a reliable person of solid physique with practical skills, a man who could be counted on. I suggested he turn to the universe in an attitude of humility and spiritual devotion and approach the job search with a commitment to prayer, service, and discipleship, asking the universe to provide the sustenance he needed so he could be of service. This last comment, keyed on Saturn conjunct Neptune, was crucial, he said, because it helped him surrender inwardly and maintain inner calm during several subsequent months of uncertainty. After Saturn turned direct in Libra and made its final pass over Neptune, he applied with the local water and electric utilities. He got some interviews, but they kept him on hold for several months while nothing happened. When Saturn entered Scorpio and passed over natal Saturn for the first time, he started working on a temporary basis. After Saturn turned direct in Scorpio, he was hired permanently by the water utility district, and within 2 years, he was promoted 3 times. Recently, when Saturn entered Capricorn, well, now a year or 2 ago, he was promoted to a management position with increased salary and retirement benefits. David tells me he has never forgotten the precise insights astrology provided to guide his job search at a crucial stage of life. So now I'm going to show you the charts of a couple, a married couple, Alan and his wife, Kathy, and she was just named a partner in a big fancy law firm. So notice the big Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto transit up in her 10th house. And the same planets are over in Alan's 12th house, the house of spirituality and inner life, solitude, feeling momentarily cloaked behind the scenes. So the 12th house is also, if you use derived house analysis, it is the 6th house from the spouse 7th house. So the 12th house signifies the partner's work, workplace, and health. Kathy is gone at the office every day before the pandemic. She was gone every day and was bringing work at home with her at nights and on weekends, totally focused on completing her work on significant cases. She has been meeting the Capricorn tests of career and accomplishment, mastery and advancement. She's doing it with flying colors. Big success. Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto in her 10th house. Now, these planets were recently squaring Mars, Saturn, and Pluto in her natal 6th house. In 2019, Saturn and Pluto were really tightly squaring her natal Mars, Saturn, and Pluto is still doing it. And there was a couple of years of intense, feverish, nonstop work in the law firm, and also aggressive intra-office politics, infighting, and power struggles, which you might expect during a strong transit to Mars, Saturn, and Pluto in the 6th house of the workplace. So she was finally elected a partner in the law firm the week that Saturn came into conjunction with Venus in the 10th house. She was finally accepted by the group and got a nice financial benefit or bonus from that first pass of Saturn to natal Venus. But her health has been severely strained during that transit of Saturn and Pluto, squaring her natal Mars, Saturn, and Pluto. She suffers from inflammation of joints, lower back pain. You see these planets in Libra, the low back is governed by Libra. And also headaches. That's a Mars symptom. Symptoms of the pressure she is under in the workplace and the toll her stressful lifestyle is taking on her. And it was taking a toll on their marriage also, as she was often irate and belligerent during those transits to her planets in Libra, the sign of marriage. So she was in need of better home-work balance and finding time for exercise and leisure. So now she is continuing her work from home during the pandemic. And this is a key thing, it's have we created a life, an occupational identity that can be adapted to working from home, working online? It's very stressful for people whose work does not allow them to do this. So meanwhile, all of this is happening for Kathy, and her husband, Alan, has been spending all of his time at home, not just since the pandemic, but even before that, from 2019 and into 2020. He's caring for their daughter. She was an infant, now she's a toddler. So he's been working tirelessly behind the scenes, supporting his wife's occupational success. Again, the 3 planets in his 12th house correspond to the wife's 6th house or work. So her career is at a peak with the planets near the MC. Alan's career in the music business is at a low ebb. There's no performing happening. He is a record music producer, so people are not doing, not paying for studio time. The 12th house is the house of karma and its results. So he continues to earn money from royalties, from past works completed. And he is learning to trust the universe to provide. That's the challenge the transits in his 12th house are presenting him with, to trust. This is a time when he's not going to be as visible. She's succeeding as the breadwinner. He's the nurturing dad and family cook, dishwasher, handyman, and gardener. He's fulfilling the potential of his natal sun, conjunct moon, the nurturing moon, in the marriage house, in the 7th house. So he's supporting the wife, he's raising the daughter. He doesn't have a big outer world career right now, but through the wisdom of astrology, he is learning to be okay with that. To know the meaning of this time is it's his moment to be the selfless servant. He's meditating daily, trying to hold the peace for the household and for the good of the world. And his knowledge of Kathy's transits allowed the marriage to thrive because it helped him be tolerant while she was having all those fierce transits to her Mars, Saturn, and Pluto in Libra. He understood she was activated in such a way that she would sometimes make belittling comments about his not working enough, things like this. But he was able to understand what she was experiencing, provide support for her physical unstressing to help her reduce her inflamed condition in light of these transits. Now, just one more brief comment about her chart. At first, I wouldn't have guessed her to be a lawyer from first glance at her chart, other than looking at natal Neptune in the 9th house in Sagittarius as a symbol of idealism about ethical and legal principles. But deeper insights emerge by following the Till midheaven extension. Kathy's ascendant ruler Mars is conjunct Saturn, which rules her midheaven and is disposed by Venus in Aquarius. And Venus's dispositor, Uranus, is in the legal sign of Sagittarius in the 8th house of business and financial partnership. Uranus is disposed by Jupiter in Scorpio, which is disposed by Pluto at the descendant, signifying her alliance with several influential senior lawyers in their work representing powerful individuals and corporations. Pluto is conjunct Saturn, ruler of the 10th house, signifying her tireless work investigating the facts and her poised demeanor in court and in conference. So in this crisis period, we've enrolled in the advanced graduate course of life. It's not the time to be weak. We have to take charge of ourselves. Even where change is forced on us, as astrologers, we strive to initiate a reaction from within our natal pattern, which creates a force field of influence for change. I hope the stories I've shared with you show vocational astrology is not only about technical analysis of a chart to guide occupational choices. It's a process of counseling people and being able to spontaneously elicit meaning from their situations at moments of heightened intensity and urgency. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I think my time is up.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. I really enjoyed this, and I love the way your last example tied in with Anne's talk about relationship astrology and how they've had to use their charts to understand each other and their relationship more fully at this time of COVID, where careers are very changing. And I think that's true for a lot of people being out of work while the other partner is working very, very hard, has extra hours, maybe they're part of an essential business. So that was really wonderful to see that. And I just had one question, because I know a lot of astrologers tend to think of squares as bad, which we know they're not. But nevertheless, I was struck by the fact that when you were in the beginning looking at so many charts and you were analyzing that the squares to the nodes or the squares to the midheaven seemed to be something you were really honing in on as important features around someone's vocational calling.
All I can say is test it yourself, everyone. Any major aspect to any of the four angles would be significant. The work of Charles and Vivian Jane shed some light on this some decades ago.
Yeah, no, it was very, very wonderful to see that presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so now we come last, but definitely not least, to wonderful Grace Morris. So Grace has a master's degree, is NCGR, PAA, ESAR CAP certified, LPMAFA certified. She's a timing trends specialist and president of Astroeconomics Inc., publishing 2 newsletters, the Astroeconomics Stock Markets newsletter and Right Time, The Right Time, and founder of the World Conference of Astroeconomics. Morris's latest book is How to Choose Stocks to Outperform the Market in 2021. Her work has been acknowledged in articles in Forbes and Financial Times, and she is business editor for the Astrology News Service, ANS. So, navigating financial and business tides of change, Grace says, we're halfway through 2020, a good moment to take stock of the year's predictions for business and financial affairs, while looking forward to uncover how the major cycles of the year are likely to continue to affect our lives in terms of world leadership, real estate values, the stock market, and business trends. And I know we're all delighted to learn more about the financial outlook. It's something that is intense, I think, in everyone's mind as we try to both be in the moment that we find ourselves in, but also have some idea of where we are heading as a country and as a world, wherever we happen to live. So, Grace, please begin. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here today. It's been quite a revelation, starting in 2020, to discover that we could have a life-changing year ahead, and it certainly has turned out to be the case. I'm going to move along in material because most of it is covered both in the article that you can read in the just go to our website, astroeconomics.com, and ask for a copy. And there's a lot of information about the rest of this year. But when I started writing this in August of 2019, the book, I just couldn't believe what the possibilities. As I mentioned, the pattern that we're going through has not occurred in 500 years. And of course, that was
Grace, we're having a little trouble with hearing you. It's just very warbly.
Oh, well, I'm not sure how to.
I'm not sure either, but I just wanted to say that so that people in the audience also know that I'm aware of it.
Okay. I don't know if that'll do any good. I could also remove my phony background, which might be inhibiting it too. Let me see if I can do that. I may not be able to with in the middle of it.
Well, while you're in the middle, I can hear you now again. So I'm sorry that we've had the interruption.
So in realizing that not only were countries and leaders going to change, and Brexit was a good example, and we're going to find all of the European countries splitting into different boundaries, as they did in the past. And 500 years ago, the smallpox epidemic, which we're repeating at this point, as well as the end of some empires. Who knows which ones will fall, just as the Aztec Empire fell under a Saturn Pluto conjunction. Tariffs are, first of all, a terrible vehicle that really helps no one, or as Boris Johnson, who was used as an example, told the US president as I said,
Grace, I'm sorry, we didn't hear you said, as Boris Johnson said, and then it went out again.
oh, he said that the UK was opposed to tariffs for centuries, and that he did not have any intention of getting into tariff wars. And unfortunately, we are definitely involved in tariff wars with China and even our neighbors. By the way, this is a solar eclipse today, which is pretty important because Prince William was born on this eclipse. And 19 relate to his position in the monarchy. Some of the questions that you might ask is, will this virus come back? And we can tell from the charts, I'll answer these really quickly. We are repeating in September, just as the powerful January 12th combination of Saturn and Pluto occurred. We're backing up to that same pattern. Who is most likely to win the US November election and why? Prejudiced. But
Hold on, I'm sorry, Grace, we so want to hear you, and it's still going in and out. I don't know if you have a headset or if you need to close down other things on your computer or get rid of the background.
Right. Let me see if I can do anything. Maybe the profile picture. I'm going to get rid of something and see if that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Did it?
I still see your profile picture.
So that did not do any good at all. Okay, I'm not sure how to do that. The only other, even turning up my sound.
Oh, okay. So what Carol, who's normally our moderator, is suggesting that if we turn the cameras off so we're not seeing ourselves, maybe that will help. So each person on the panel, can we turn our cameras off?
And I since I'm already on the screen here.
In the bottom left corner of the computer, you should be able to click on video and.
Okay, I'm going to have to end the show to see that.
Oh,
Here.
yes, you'll have to. Mm-hmm. But we might need you to start over again. I really think you have so much to say. And yes, and William also says if you disable the Zoom background, that will also help with how much.
Okay, tell him how I can get there quickly to take out the background.
I don't think so. I think it's in the settings. You pretty much have to go
Right.
off. Let's just. Can you, if you.
I was gonna say, can I try to come on my phone instead of using the computer, possibly? But again, I'm past that stage. I'd have to go completely out and come back in again.
Right. What I'm wondering, now that you've changed so that you're not full screen, can you turn off your video? Because that'll get rid of the background and your face. So
Okay,
that will.
Turn off the video.
Lower left side, where there's the
side.
yes.
And the video is the camera.
Yes, the video is the camera.
Okay.
It's Mercury retrograde, everybody.
Oh boy, and how?
Mhm.
And I've clicked on it, but doesn't, maybe up here is where I can stop the video? We don't
Yeah,
want to do that.
it's usually the bottom left on a Zoom screen.
Okay.
And someone's suggesting there's 3 dots in the upper right of your Zoom window to
I
disable
looked
the
at
video.
that and get over here.
Let's see. Okay. So the videos have gone away. Can we hear you talk now?
Mute.
Are you there?
Okay.
Okay, I can hear you now. Can you say a few words? Let's.
Well, as I was talking about the November election and the other questions of why the stock market is doing so well, but the economy is not. The high unemployment and the low gross domestic product, our GDP, national and personal debt, and is it time to buy a house? Again, all of these are in my article and also in the newsletter and book, and the graphs and patterns for where these cycles come from is also available.
Wonderful. And we're getting good volume now. So.
Oh, terrific.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, the virus pandemic will forever alter the world order. And I think this is the most important thing to remember about 2020. I've worked with businesses for 30 years. And in December, I had 3 new businesses come in. All had in their business charts and even in their own, the Capricorn or Cancer planets at 22 to 24 degrees. And in most cases, it was an emergency to work on the businesses have come in the same pattern as there. And I think the key to 2020 is just do not do it in 2019 or since the business started. To succeed,
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, in other words, it is important to do things differently, both on a personal level, in terms of your business, not to try to repeat or hold on to the way bailout, so to speak. This did not cover particularly small business and middle-sized businesses, and so we're going to find a lot of businesses that make important changes will fare a lot better than those who try to do it the way they did previously. The pandemic could wipe out $5 trillion from the U.S. GDP, and this makes a difference. The planetary cycles that started off the year and are upending structures in our government and in the financial world and brought a pandemic in its wake. The conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, bringing Brexit to a conclusion, and the potential for a war between the U.S. and Iran, and the outbreak of the coronavirus in China. China also is in our trade wars and interactions. The struggle is also between is the U.S. going to survive as a world leader, pulling out of so many of the international organizations? And this becomes a really important issue. And the changes that are going on. One of the questions people wonder is, how can the stock market keep going up and the economy going down? Well, the stock market is in a secular bull market, and it will continue to go up. The economy in the McWhorter cycles is definitely, we have peaked. May of 2017 was the peak, and we are in a declining to from above normal levels. So the economy is not going to produce the gross domestic product, but as I said, the market will continue to go up.
When you say, excuse me, when you say that the market is declining or the economy is declining and the stock market is going up, are you looking at like financial indicators, like for economic growth?
Well,
Not astrology, right?
well, both.
Okay.
In astroeconomics is the study of cycles, but it's through the use of fundamental, technical, and planetary cycle analysis. So putting all that information together is why for over 30 years, no matter how many opposing viewpoints, the astrological cycles have always worked. I stand behind the inflationary cycles, deflationary cycles, the interest rates, and the sectors in the markets. They're right on matching the Jupiter patterns. And these, again, are available. I believe they were added to my article in the OPA magazine, and they're in my book, as I said. So you can see them. I can move ahead to them. But I think it's important to also note halfway through 2020 that what we began with was the destruction of big business and big government. In the businesses, you can see what's happened as a result of the virus, and these large businesses are fighting to hang on. This change that's going on, and the emphasis. We have deregulated to such an extent, both affecting everything from the food supply to climate change. And all of this will change in December as the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 Aquarius occurs. In other words, what happens is the public's interest shifts and changes with these cycles. And who most fits breaking up everything, government particularly, and that will be the winner on November 3rd. And then we go to, in December, this pattern, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle in Aquarius. And by the inauguration, when this has taken effect and more of the planets have moved out of Capricorn, we could have a real change of heart and people now concerned about the environment, either due to some tragedy, an oil spill, all those tankers that are floating around can't land because we're on overload with oil, or a food problem because we have taken apart the so many of the regulations that protected the air and water and so forth may come back when we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction.
Mm.
And I think it's interesting that India, for the first time, northern India saw the Himalayas. And again, its public priorities change. Right now, the corporations and big government and so forth, with all the planets in Capricorn, are taking precedence, and this will change as the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And then Saturn-Jupiter conjunction occurs. Saturn-Pluto has done the damage of wrecking. The wrecking, again, to give you the clue to who's most likely to win the election, who is the biggest wrecking ball. And that, yet that fits a pattern at this time. If we go back to it was there at every major war, World War I, World War II.
What was there? That cut out for a moment. What was there in these times?
Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And 9/11. So you can see how significant this Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January was. And I think last year, to even see how dynamic it would be, it was still shocking to see how bad it is, and it is not going to get better until we finally come to December with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. And in other words, like fossil fuels are going to lose their prominence. You can look at the headlines in the newspapers and you're amazed that from one month to another how things change. And it happens in the stock market. I see it all the time when we go through. And looking ahead, it's sort of like last year, one of my, the transportation chains. In fact, this says it all probably. One of the subscribers said your call on the cruise ships and airplanes still blows my mind. And that was because transportation, which was very much in favor with Jupiter in Sagittarius last year, and the airlines just grew at a tremendous rate, and here everything is grounded. It's sort of like what happened after 9/11. Jupiter had been in Gemini, air travel, and that ended, and Jupiter moved into Cancer. Well, by that time, after 9/11, all the airplanes were grounded. If you remember, in Nova Scotia, they all came down. And people did not fly. They didn't, wasn't it Applebee's that had the slogan, fun in your neighborhood? People were not leaving to go traveling. They were staying put. That was Jupiter in Cancer. So what I look at is the sectors that fit the Cancer stocks, and now we're into the Capricorn process. And again, the emphasis is on everything business and corporations. And next year, as we move into Aquarius, the environment friendly will be, again, part of the pattern. And listing all the stocks that go with that. What else will change? Working from home, groceries having been delivered, and we're going to no longer have the open trading at the stock exchanges. Trading will all be done in Chicago. So our Chicago Board of Trade and all of our exchanges, I think, are going to change. Inflation and the Federal Reserve, which I watch very carefully. But as the former chair said that it was a fluke, the 18% inflation rate, and that they were recalculating how they now look at the inflation rate. And it will not return, by the way, until January of 2025. And that's a Neptune cycle. And the law, here again, the stock market is in a secular bull market, and the economy and the stock market used to go about 6 years. Everything is changing in 2020. So Oh, and then I've already mentioned the eclipse. And if you're interested to know if the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, will still exist, yes, it will. And the reason for that, it began on the Uranus-Pluto square and in March of 2010. And it's the same pattern that Social Security and Medicare became law under the Uranus-Pluto pattern. So it definitely, no matter how it's attacked, will survive. The other effects we're using is Zoom, and Zoom stock has zoomed up, and it's 200 to 300% above where it started.
Wow.
You're going to have to give me the signal because I know I went over, and I can stop here and just say, look for all the in the career astrologer.
Yeah, I think that's because we're having so much volume problem, that's a good idea that everybody reads your article. But I think I'd also like if people have specific questions, because a lot of this affects us personally. One of the questions that's come up, Grace, is at what point might the secular bull market come to terms with the economy? So do you think that
it's certainly not going to be in the next 3 years?
Okay, so you think the stock market will continue to improve, and overall, what would you say about the economy? I mean, I've heard you say it's crashing, big businesses are crashing, it's restructuring, but what does that mean for us as astrologers, do you think?
Well, let me show you that pattern. Okay, here's the McWhorter cycles, and this is today. In other words, the high
We can't hear you again.
Oops. And the real estate cycles also, they're based on the nodes, but they're just a wee bit different. Let me show you that pattern too, and then I'll show you the McWhorter cycles. As you can see, we topped out in November of 2018, and the bottom will come in 2028, and then we'll go to another top in 2037. This has worked. For Alice Richard did the work on this, and it's I think 150 years old, and the patterns work. So back to McWhorter, what the normal levels, November 2018 to January 2022. And the lowest economic period, and this will repeat 2008 to 2009, and it was easy to predict that because those were the lows that McWhorter. So I keep them updated, but I absolutely have seen these work over and over again, the highs and the lows. So we're going into the lowest economic period, 2026 through March of 2028.
And you're seeing that primarily from the North Node location, and I understand that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay, and we're getting several questions about who you think will win the presidential election, and bearing in mind that OPA tries to be very non-political as much as possible.
I'm not talking from a political point of view. I'm saying who fits the pattern of what's going on, the destruction of regulation and trade wars and the corporations and government being torn apart, and believe in global warming, and you can just see it has to be someone who fits that pattern. But because
because the what? Can you go back? Because
the planets in Capricorn fit who is more likely to destroy, and it has regulations that protect air, water, food, so forth. And I think there'll be a major change. So once the current president is reelected, by the time December comes, and we've now moved into the Aquarius, Jupiter, Saturn, begin to notice, and again, this could be through a great disaster in the ecology of the world, that people will now maybe regret that they put so much emphasis on corporations, big business, destroying the regulations that kept food, water, air, and so forth safe. And now we are in the Aquarian climate change engine.
Okay, so no matter who is in now, what you're saying is once we have the Jupiter Saturn alignment, then as a culture, we will want somebody who's more about protecting the climate, the environment, and not so favorable to big business.
Correct.
Okay, fascinating. This is a mundane little question. What software do you use to look at cycles?
Well, for my financial stock market newsletter and all that, I use Investors Business Daily. These are very expensive programs, but they really assist me. And if you're looking at setting up charts, it's SolarFire.
Aha, SolarFire. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and transiting Pluto, going across the ascendant, descendant in the Federal Reserve, 31, was right before the Great Depression. And the banks that failed, smooth hauling was again the Tariff Act that brought on the Great Depression. The answer to all of this, as I write in my book, is infrastructure, which no one seems to be interested in. But we built bridges, we repaired the national parks, so many things that really helped employment. And if we had an infrastructure, we would be giving employment to the huge amount of unemployed. And in January, I have already mentioned that the Federal Reserve would change its data, and that is the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto to the Jupiter in the Federal Reserve chart. It's all there, and it's all part of the cycles.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Can you tell us about buying a house now? Is it
Absolutely?
When's a good time to buy a house?
Now the question is buying a house. Oh, here's what's hot and what's not. The okay, what is in values? So it means if you want to make a profit on real estate, you want to buy at the bottom. The last bottom was August 2009. And it was also able to predict the restart of the markets, and that was using the Bradley cycles. The year before, when nobody thought we were having a recession, the cycles were already indicating that, and not until March of 2008 when Bear Stearns collapsed, and then Lehman Brothers collapsed in September, did we head into the Great Recession. And we restarted in March 9th of 2009, and real estate bottomed August of 2009. So if you wanted to buy a property then, that was the time to do it to make a profit by November of 2018. Now, more people are buying a house to live in. And as far as the value of the property, it's not going to go up. In other words, it'll either stay at the level it's at or slowly decline until the bottom 2028. But if you're living in a house, you're going to buy real estate. It's just that this is not the time to make.
Right. So buy a house if you just want to live in it, but if you think you want to make money, wait till 2028 where we have another true bottom.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. People are asking if they can have some slides. Normally we suggest that people just go to the recording and when it's posted on YouTube and watch the whole thing again. But because we've had so much volume problem, we might try to see if we can get a collection of slides that could also be somehow available. So we'll maybe talk about that later, because I know you've had a lot more fascinating information to give us than we've been able to fully hold. I was also noticing, you were saying in one of those slides back a ways that we'll be maybe looking at universal guaranteed income going forward.
Well, that's a possibility too. But I think one of the reasons that the healthcare it's going to be a bigger issue after the hospitals and everything that's happened. People are going to change their thinking by 2021, by the next year. So many things that sort of just kind of it didn't seem important are going to seem important then.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think that's the real gift of the COVID virus, is that people no longer can imagine that other people are, in difficult circumstances because of, they're not doing enough, or they're not working hard enough, or they didn't get a good enough education. We're starting to see that anybody can be subject to getting this sick. Anybody can be subject to losing their income and needing some kind of extra support. So when we talked all along about the changes of 2020 and how we'd come to a point where cultural beliefs and philosophies would change, and that would create a new structure of business and government and all of our establishments, I think we can see now why we're going through this, and the many, many changes that will evolve to, I hope, create a fairer, more just society.
It's more likely to happen in Aquarius than in Capricorn. And I think that's, as astrologers, we really need to look at those conditions. Through the years, I can remember saying with the Neptune and that the high inflation and interest rates would go down November of 1984. And of course, it doesn't matter who's in office. And they went completely down. And by the 1990s, the interest rates were, in some cases, negative, but 2%, but negative in Japan. So what I've learned is I believe the astrology cycles or the planetary cycles, and I don't necessarily argue. I just wait it out. The recession comes, the Great Recession came, and we headed up. And now we're still in a secular bull market.
All right. Well, thank you, Grace, very much for your presentation and your expertise and experience. Can you stop your screen share, and can the other panelists come back onto video? And we'll just say hello and goodbye. I feel like it's been a very wonderful presentation by everybody. This has been such a radical change for all of us in the way that we live our lives, and something that on one hand, astrologically, we predicted, and on another hand, I don't think any of us could have imagined just how major it would be to close down the world for such a great period of time. So I hope, OPA membership, that you have also enjoyed this presentation as much as I have, and we will continue to connect. We will continue to support our OPA family. Anything anybody else wants to say? I see you, Anne, waving.
Well, I think we get through this together. That's really the key. And if we all do our Saturns, we'll be okay.
I agree. All right. Thank you, everybody. Until the next time.
Bye, everybody.